Nonprofit and philanthropic leaders devote their lives to the service of others, but sometimes they need a little help. Kristine Michie has been deep in the work and the play of helping changemakers grow their impact for decades. So whether you're ladling soup at a local shelter or attending a UN peace conference, you need to find the balance between the heavy work and a light touch so you don't burn out. And Kristine believes play is at the center of that. Welcome to the PlayFull Podcast, bringing fun to the serious work of changing the world.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the PlayFull Podcast. We are in our Interfaith Dialogue series, which we've called Thoughts and Prayers. And the week that we are coming to you with this episode, you'll be hearing it a few weeks later, has been after several, events, violent shootings and things around the world. So it's, I kind of felt like whenever we ran this, there would be something relevant to talk about, which is a sad state. But I think, but why we're doing this, and thoughts and prayers, which is often sort of offered up by the leaders in the moment, has seemed to have sort of just like lost its meaning, but thoughts and prayers really are significant. So I want to talk about thoughts and prayers. I want to talk about thoughts and prayers as they support action. So today with us, Zev Mishell and Scot Nakagawa are joining us on the podcast. For Scott, it is a return visit. Thank you, Scott, for that. And for Zev, it is his first time on. So welcome to both of you.
Great to be here.
Great to be here. And
excellent. Yeah, right on. So Scott, for those of you who don't know, he is the director of the 22nd Century Initiative, and Zev is the senior program strategist at Interfaith Alliance. And I didn't necessarily put these guys together because of this, but it's a beautiful part of it is that you all were together. I think it was on 9/11, and you were speaking at an event together. If I've got details wrong on that, but I remember, Scott, you published something around that time, and there was a connection with what Interfaith Alliance was working on at that moment. So this knit together well as we were talking about bringing some different folks together to talk about faith as an activator, faith as an organizing tool. So here we go. Oh, but wait, we have to have some ice cream. So let's each grab our ice cream as we do this first bit. It's early where I am, and so I usually have coffee flavored ice cream if I've got some at that time. So today I'm having cookies and coffee, which is a Taharka Brothers flavor, coffee ice cream with chocolate cookie pieces. All right, Zev, what did you choose?
I am rocking the cookie dough flavor. It's really, really good. I will say, Kristine, that 12 pints of ice cream ended up coming. Oh. So my roommates and I have been really enjoying quite a bit of ice cream, double for every flavor.
Oh my God. So, the supply chain is a wonderful and mysterious thing. And so sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes this is the first time it's been doubled up. So congratulations. Happy for you. Scott, how did your ice cream situation turn out?
Well, I also got 12 pints. And I have a little dog, and I take him for walks in the neighborhood, and all his little friends who give him treats got ice cream.
Oh, what fun! What fun. So that means up in the Pacific Northwest, there are at least 10 or 12 new fans of Taharka Brothers across the country in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes, and I am having chocolate love, though my favorite was the honey graham.
Mm-hmm.
That was maybe the best ice cream flavor I've ever had.
Ditto. I agree. That has been, it's not a scientific study, but I think that has been by far and away the favorite. And I think it's because, I don't know about you guys, but it's so surprising how the graham cracker stays all crunchy like that.
Yeah.
Must be something scientific to that.
Yeah. Oh, now seriously, when we order ice cream to be sent to people, this is it.
Excellent. We so Taharka Brothers, for those that don't know, TAHARKA, Taharka Brothers, based in Baltimore, Maryland, social enterprise, employee-owned ice cream company that has been supporting the podcast for 2 years and sending 6 or sometimes 12 pints to our guests, which is a really generous, quite a generous thing. So hats off to that. All right, you two, let's, if we can, talk about how, joy, how play, how love is sustaining you right now, and how joy and faith are connected. It certainly seems like, that feels like that's almost like in a thesaurus, they could be connected. Zev, let me start with you. How are you finding joy, play, and love to be a key activator and a sustenance right now for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question. I think because on the surface, things are so horrible right now. And I think for me personally, it's just important to be honest about that. And I think one of my most important religious principles is just like trying to pursue truth as I understand it. And sometimes it might feel like joy is just like a distraction from the work itself, of building community with one another, of being with one another when the problems feel so massive, particularly when you can always read another article, you can always be engaging in a different way, you can always be writing something else. And so I think I just want to start by like, we're really up against something pretty extraordinary right now, that has been in different waves for many, many periods of American history, for many, many decades, centuries of global history that we're all confronting. And I think it's important to both see the moment for what it is, which is a moment of authoritarian escalation, within a wider context of just authoritarian movement for many decades that has affected many different people. So I think with all that being said, I'm finding a lot of joy in being with the people I love. It's the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. And so my roommates and I, we celebrated by having around 40, 45 people, bringing together different people from all of our different worlds. And so I think just creating proximity to other people, and feeling that closeness is just so critical. And then when you build those relationships, you can do learning together, you can do activism together, you can build on top of that. But I think community is just the foundation for any kind of sustainable joy or resistance.
Beautiful. And I love that quote, pursue truth as I understand it. Thank you for that. Scott, how about you? What does that bring to mind?
Well, I think that social movements are, social phenomena. They're cultural phenomena. They don't happen just because of the politics, right? People don't want to just have the bread. They want the roses. And so I think it's really pretty critically important. We make the mistake all the time of thinking that people are rational in their decision making. But the reality is that while we can be rational decision makers, that's not how most of us actually make decisions,
Mm,
right? Most of us are triggered to make decisions because of emotions. This is a story that was told by a, neuroscientist that I wrote about a few days ago in the Anti-Authoritarian Playbook named Antonio Damasio, who had a patient named Elliot who had a brain tumor. Elliot was a very exceptionally intelligent person, very, very capable. He had a brain tumor in front of his brain and had to have it removed. And it damaged a bundle of nerves that are right behind your eyes that help you to make that trigger you emotionally. And his whole life fell apart as they discovered this because, of course, he couldn't decide anything. It's like going to the grocery store and trying to buy cereal by going, like, what's the price per ounce plus the nutritional value plus, all of these other things, how much sugar, how much fiber. Um, the reality is you need the colorful mascot, right? You need the emotional appeal. You need that tiger that
mm,
reminds you that
mm.
of the first time you ever had that cereal when you were a little kid. Those things actually are the things that help us to make decisions. We don't want to be stuck in the sidewalk while a car comes barreling at us thinking left, right, left, right. No, you got to just decide, right? And those are all emotional triggers that help us to make those decisions. And if we're not triggering joy with this movement, the alternative is nihilism, right? In the face of all that we're facing. And so I say, as long as we need to trigger people to emotion, put rage and nihilism aside and reach for joy.
Mm.
Joy
Wow.
is magnetic.
Yeah, yeah. Have you had folks in this period, let's talk specifically kind of about like this 2025, need to be convinced that play, joy is not frivolous and is not being serious enough, for example? Have you bumped into that, either of you? Go ahead, Scott.
Well, yes, a lot. Though people are quickly adopting the need for, or adapting to the need for humor, for play, and for fun at demonstrations. Portland, Oregon, where I am, is the best example of this in some ways, because we have such a tradition here of just being weird. And so, the naked bike ride past the ice building with all the officers lined up, the, inflatables showing up at demonstrations. These have totally inspired people, and really changed their idea about how to engage this moment. They want to make demonstrations into this sort of theater of the absurd, where we expose the ridiculousness of the dictator by forcing his hand, right? And we also want them to be demonstrations of who we are and what we could be. And so we want people to want to be part of those things, right? And the way you do that is with the clowns and the inflatables and balloons and the jokes and the whole thing. Just makes it into something that fills a void in our lives, a longing for belonging to something more powerful than ourselves, that also embodies all of our aspirations. So absolutely, I think we should be we should think of joy as a kind of martial art in our organization.
Nice.
But there are those who really want to take everything very, very seriously because they understand how serious the problems are, and there is definitely room for that too. But they should go hand in hand, right? That kind of serious examination of the problems before us and a joyful alternative that people can join in on.
You're both, as I understand, kind of also students of history, theological and otherwise. Zev, is this ancient practice to bring joy and play and love into movements for resistance and movement for change?
Yeah, I will say, I don't know if I can say that it's the ancient practice in resistance, but it is certainly deeply embedded in Jewish tradition. Rabbis making jokes to one another, like this particular way of relating to one another, even just the hermeneutic approach where you're taking language and you're seeing how to have fun with it. And if this word sounds like this word, then it has this particular implication, and sort of following that as a way of building meaning. And so I've felt that in a lot of ways in my life, that the closer I feel to religious community, the better we're able to experiment and to do that play with one another between Hebrew and English and Aramaic. It's very special to be in to be the inheritor of a multivocal tradition, which speaks in so many different ways, and with interpretive strategies to sort of try to make meaning from the tools that we have. I will say that I think the thing that we're up against more than anything else, in my opinion, is just exhaustion. And I've personally just felt myself completely overcome by that feeling recently, of just the weight of the thing that we're trying to respond to and how much it calls of us, and what rest looks like. And so I think joy and rest are intimately related to one another. And I think that exhaustion breeds a kind of despair because it creates a cycle by which you just don't have the energy to continue showing up, or you don't have the energy to continue giving the types of emotions that Scott was speaking about to your activism and to your work, to really understand the stakes that are at hand.
When I started the podcast, which is going to be 3 years in March, I recall that I was thinking.
Nope, she'll be back in a second. Hold on a minute. Oh, Kristine, we had a little internet dropout. If you where you started saying, if I recall you saying, I think that was where you left off.
Okay, good. Hope it's working. Thank you for checking or catching that. So when I started the podcast, which it'll be 3 years ago, come up in March, I was thinking that the offering of it out on the platforms and the experience of the recording of it for the guests, you guys in this case, was going to be a break, quote unquote, from the work. And that people would experience that opportunity to kind of like step off from the work for the moment and talk about joy, play, and love and have some ice cream. I have found so true, almost from the outset, that hasn't been the case, that it has been, my guests have reflected to me, this has felt completely integrated into their to-do list for the day, their plans for the week, where they are that day in the movement, in the moment. And that's been really exciting to me. It has felt like that whole cloth, that whole piece. And then I've witnessed this sort of, my sense is like a permissioning when you all see each other having done this, come on the podcast for 30, 45 minutes and eating ice cream, and you see who else who's done that. And I'm proud to say it's a lot of really serious movement builders and change makers. It's like right, this is part of the work. This is part of the day. Am I capturing that, not so much even about the PlayFull Podcast, but about other ways you found that the joy piece isn't, I got to go take a break now and do joy, but it is integrated and a part of everything you're doing. Scott, you're nodding.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, just in order to be able to move forward in this world and imagine something better than what we have been told we are due, you got to have a certain amount of faith, right? You have to be able to make that reach for something that you can't see, can only imagine. And faith is really helpful in all of that, right? Joy and faith, by the way, go together, right? One makes room for the other. People become part of faith communities not just because they were told you have to. I mean, that does happen, but most of us make a choice at some point in our lives. And what we choose, I think, is the experience of the divine, protection, ritual and order in community with people. It's basically faith provides the sacred canopy under which we create our lives, whatever it is we have faith in, right? What's happened in our contemporary situation is that sacred canopy that has been established for years and years by traditional faiths around the world, traditional faith traditions, has been torn by the internet, by globalization, by climate change, by many different factors by cultural change in general, by democracy, in fact, which allowed for many traditions to be challenged, right? And so, what we need to do is figure out how do we reweave a sacred canopy that makes sense for us if we want to live in a free country, in a free world.
Beautiful. Reweave our sacred canopy. Beautiful. Zev, what comes to mind for you on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when one shows up in that truthful way, whether it's in a joyful space or in like a prayerful space, I think other people draw on it. And so I think kind of like what Scott was alluding to, that there's that magnetic quality. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in congregational settings or service settings where there isn't that. And everyone is just sitting there like, when's it going to be done? And the difference of when there are a handful of people or when the clergy person or the leader of the community brings that vulnerability it's a completely different context. And I think one of the things that we risk losing when we look at faith as an ingredient for resistance is we'll eventually end up overlooking it as this force for spiritual grounding and this force for connection with God, which can then lead into those political actions. And I'll just say within my own tradition, like, when you're at shul or when you're in synagogue, you can feel the difference between when folks are showing up authentically to be there to pray, in addition to being there for community. And I think it's so critical to sort of see them hand in hand. And I think the other thing I'll add is I completely agree with faith and with religion as this credible source for meaning making and for ritual and for community and for structure. And I think it's also the ingredient for certain types of hierarchies and certain forms of patriarchy and for forces that sometimes within the faith tradition itself, there are the ingredients to resist. But as inheritors of multivocal traditions which give many different sources speaking in many different ways, I think we need to be bringing our values to the way in which we relate to them to create a faith tradition worth preserving. And I think over the past 100 years, a lot of our faith leaders have let us down, and they haven't actually sort of brought that diligence to their relationship, to their theologies, and to our traditions.
A year plus ago, I got to walk part of the Camino de Santiago for a milestone birthday. And it was right before the 2024 election. And I was, we didn't know what was going to happen, but I was worried. And I'm walking along those literally ancient paths, right? On some of the stones that probably, for 2,000 years, people have walked some of those paths. And I remember taking solace from that. It kind of reminded me of like looking at the earth from space. It gave me this like a perspective in a chronological perspective, kind of like that's a distance perspective. But I was like, there have been tyrants, there have been dictators, there have been all these epics, right? And we're in one right now. This is the one I'm alive for. So my prayer is, and I was walking this, kind of pilgrimage, right? So I was in a prayerful state. Was my prayers, God, please help show me my role. And I just like each day show me my role. And that has continued to serve me. It reminds me a little bit, Zev, about what you said about, the knowing the truth to the best of my ability on any given day. On any given day, what's the role I can play? And lifting up the voice of others like I get to do here on the podcast feels part of what I was called to do. And since I started this series, I was talking to Jennifer Butler, Reverend Jennifer Butler from Faith and Democracy. Her episode aired recently. And I said, if you would have told me 2 years ago that we were going to be talking about like God on my podcast, I'd probably been like, no, I don't know. I'm probably going to not do that. And now I'm like in it and I'm like, God, thank God. And you guys, Robert Rabin from Rabin Group was the one who said to me when I was interviewing him, and you guys, for those who don't know, he's a lobbyist and a consultant. He's based in DC and he is in the work. And he said to me at the end of our recording, I don't really have any segue for this, but I want to kind of challenge the progressive left to not eschew the power of spirituality and faith as a tool that we should be using. Let's not cede that, quote unquote, to the other side. And here we are having this conversation. So I'd love for those who are wondering, what are these guys talking about? Like resistance and mobilizing and activism and faith and God and traditions. How can we weave those together for people who feel like they need to stay distinct? Zev, you go first, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe important to just begin with that phenomenon of faith and politics being considered so separate in our movement spaces is, in my opinion, very much a product of the global North. And I don't think it's as true globally as it is in the United States or in Europe, that there are folks in many different contexts who are working to weave those things together and seeing culture and religion and song and dance and tradition as deeply bound up in the political work of movement building. And I think it's absolutely essential because if we're going to be able to imagine something else, if we're going to be able to activate within these traditions the best of what they can offer, then I think we need to sort of see it as a terrain for struggle and a terrain for engagement. And something else I'll note is that regardless of how one on the progressive left even relates to religion to begin with, whether they have a poor experience with it or have been hurt by it or have been loved by it, and I think for a lot of us, it's often a mixture of all the above. Religion is an essential feature of this global democratic and global authoritarian moment, that it's deeply embedded in the ways in which dictatorships in Hungary and in Southeast Asia and all over the world are showing up and working to advance their policies. And so I think integrating our own understanding of it only strengthens our ability to take on the ways in which they're using religion.
Wonderful. Thanks. Scott.
Well, the thing is that modern politics just is religion by other means, right? I mean, the way we understand politics is written on a religious template. And so I think we need to keep that in mind and understand that questions of faith are at the center of every struggle over power. And religion is never neutral. Never in my experience have I seen religion just being neutral. It's always a struggle going on somewhere within the institution or the community around power. And there's almost always an authoritarian side because religions tend to be relatively hierarchical in most cases and sanctify hierarchy. And so, this is a really important place to fight. But, we need to politicize everything and fight on every issue. I see people backing away from having difficult conversations about race because they think they're polarizing, and that's just conceding ground to the other side. Definitional power is what they get out of that, right? Similarly, on this question of faith, if we are not willing to fight on these grounds, we give them definitional power over what it means to be a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist or or a Muslim or whatever we happen to be, whatever faith tradition we happen to be of. We are giving them that definitional power, and we're ceding that ground, all that infrastructure, all those faithful people, all that power, And so I think it's really critically important, and people should always remember this name, Jaime Sin. Cardinal Jaime Sin, who in 1987, when Ferdinand Marcos tried to steal an election from Corazon Aquino, the dictator of Ferdinand Marcos, the People Power movement basically was able to use a relationship they had with Cardinal Sin of the Catholic Church and got him to defect to their side, to declare the election fraudulent, and then to follow it up by going on the radio in order to protect military defectors who were in an encampment in downtown Manila. He called for 2 million Filipinos to step forward and surround those compounds and protect those people. Nuns stood in front of tanks. Priests stood in front of the doors. Many, many, many lay people showed up and put flowers on the barrels of the rifles being pointed in their direction. And some of those rifles turned around. In other words, some of those soldiers actually put down their guns and joined the resistance because they just believed that it was a matter of faith for them to do it, and because of what they saw demonstrated in that moment, which was such a great act of love. It just moved them. And so just know that, just the smallest acts can have the biggest consequences. It really helped to win the day. 4 days later, Ferdinand Marcos was in Hawaii at the behest of Ronald Reagan because he needed to get out of the Philippines. And so Corazon Aquino became the president, and the People Power movement for that moment at least won.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm thinking about, right now, imagining that for us, our version of that right now, and maybe not even so much a version, maybe that exact thing, right? Some of those images you just conjured. And I'm noticing in my own mind a gap between, the moment and that picture that I'm going, ooh, could we? But history provides fodder for our imaginations. I mean, history also provides examples of what we want to completely move away from, but it does. And you both have been talking about and posting about examples of this. And I think Americans, I guess I'll just speak for myself, for all of us, but I think we've just felt like, we're isolated from all of that. Those are irrelevant. But there are so many really ripe comparisons right now from which we can draw the inspiration we need. And I've been talking a lot about imagination on the podcast as a form of play, right? Because we can remember using our imagination to be playful. And faith and imagination are probably almost synonyms, right? Along with hope, all those three kind of sister words. Any thoughts on that, Zev?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the way in which ritual takes you into your body. And I was just sort of thinking about this funny analogy that the word goof, which in English is just sort of a silly person, in Hebrew is body. And just that, when you wear your tallis, which is the shawl that people traditionally wear during services, or when in the morning, traditionally folks wrap what are called tefillin or phylacteries on their arm for the purpose of praying in the morning. It's these deeply embodied rituals that are from elements of the earth. And I think finding our way back to that sense of connection to one another. And something I've been thinking a lot about is just the power of the internet, but particularly the power of artificial intelligence to just completely, it has the power to completely upend how we understand knowledge, how we understand community with one another. And I was speaking about this with a colleague, and he was just talking about the importance of seeing the power of the tool and then finding that reconnection to the world itself. And I think it's so easy to lose that. And I think religion calls for you to be in that, or at least the way in which I orient myself to Judaism asks me to do that, where it asks to put on these materials and to do these rituals, to light the Hanukkah candles, to do the Shabbat dinner, for the purpose of stimulating the senses, of bringing the emotions into it. And I think once you lose that, once you're working from a two-dimensional plane, whether it's a screen or a book, and it isn't something living in your life, then I think whether for resistance or whether just for a thriving community itself, I think you've lost something essential.
Scott, I feel free to riff on that in any way you like. And I also that kind of made me think about a post you had recently about symbols. Symbols are a ritualistic tool. Nations have symbols and religions have symbols, and you were a call to action in a post around the resistance. Our resistance right now needs to come up with a symbol. And I took a picture of the bumper sticker on the back of my dirty car and sent it to one of our colleagues to share with you, which is it's a hand with a peace sign in red, white, and blue. And I ever since I thought, yay me, I got that on the back of my car, I thought more people would stop me and say, hey, where'd you get that? I want one. That hasn't happened yet. Anyways, so I'm craving a symbol myself. So tell us about ritual and symbol and how those are important in this moment.
Well, symbols are important because they allow movements to reach further, to actually make statements without making sentences, right? People need to be out there fighting for the cultural landscape. We need to be able to own that cultural landscape, and we need to demonstrate in the cultural landscape as we take territory within that cultural landscape, what kind of power we have, how many we are, and also what the limits are on authoritarian power. You know, like if you can get away with putting up your symbol on walls everywhere, um, you know, it's a reminder to people that actually that's possible, that you can resist, that you can make public statements, that you can actually decide that I own this street and I'm going to get all my neighbors and me to put up signs, whatever it happens to be. It would be great if it were just one symbol. I realize that nowadays that's a tough thing, but you know, think about, for example, the Serbian poor movement that used the clenched fist as their symbol. They put it up everywhere. They stenciled it onto walls. They, you know, like they put it everywhere, and it became a trigger to action for people, a reminder that the resistance was alive, that it was possible to resist. Slobodan Milosevic, who was considered at the time untouchable, invincible, suddenly looked a little bit weaker. And then in combination with, of course, humor, right? Giving the symbol a meaning. It's not just an angry symbol of a fist, but actually using humor, like practically like stand-up comedy, to make the point that you can actually defy this guy and get away with it. One of their actions was to use a barrel in which they put his face, I believe it was, and then you could pay a dinar to like hit the barrel with a stick. And the point was to try to get the police to arrest the barrel because it would be the only way they could get it to stop, because it's not actually illegal to be doing it, right? So they would have to confiscate the barrel. And so they did, and they got it on film and they played it. And it just became this thing for people, just laughing at Milosevic and the ridiculousness of his regime arresting a barrel. So, you know, like the things go together, right? The actions and symbols. But those symbols are really, really important to us. They help us to see, I belong to you and you belong to me. And there are many, many, many of us.
Yeah, yeah. Zev, what comes to mind for you thinking about that, religious symbols and resistance symbols and chants and mantras and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think within the context of one's community or within that broader national community, it's really, really powerful. And I think just as I was listening, I was just thinking about like that we're in an age of rising climate destruction, genocide, authoritarianism, and it just feels like we're in a period of where the value of human life has been profoundly, profoundly disgraced. And I think anything one can do to sort of treat one another with more respect or to bring humor or to bring joy and to just like indicate to both ourselves and to the world that that isn't true and that we're living in a world where a couple hundred madmen structure it such that human life is not as valuable as it is and should be, and that the life of the planet and the life of nature is just treated as something expendable, disposable. I think those symbols, when they raise us up out of that, when they sort of speak to the dignity and the worth of all people, when they speak to the reality that in my tradition, we see ourselves as created in the image of God, as created both unique to ourselves and as a part of this wider collective, which is in the divine image. I think it's an essential feature of what the resistance can and should look like, in my opinion, is to just really recognize and to cherish the value of human life and to understand that certain lives in this world have been treated as though they're worth less. And yet in the eyes of that thing that is greater than us, whether God or whether just the structure of the world we live in, that isn't ultimately true. And that however much they try to make us believe it, it isn't true.
We usually save this, we eat the ice cream when we talk about this because it has a fun play on words, but we already had our ice cream. But I still want to ask you both, what's the scoop on how you came to care? A bit of your kind of political and worldview origin story. When did you realize the world was bigger than you, your family, maybe just the folks on your block, and feel like you had a role to play in making it better, fairer, more equitable? Scott, what comes to mind for you on that?
Well, there is an origin story, though I have to say that every time I meet a new person who's an activist in the field, I am re-inspired again. You know, like, I mean, look at Zev, you know. I mean, he's somebody who went to Harvard and studied at the Harvard Divinity School and then decided to take his degree and the knowledge that he got there and apply it in an activist setting where, you know, I mean, we are broke-ass people. It's not like there's a lot of financial reward here. You know, you have to do it for the passion for it, right? You have to love it. And so every time I see people making those decisions, I have greater faith in humanity. But you know, for me, the whole story really is that I was raised in a family that was very political. very transactionally political, right? Run candidates, get yourself positioned, maybe find a promotion in the bureaucracy, that kind of political. But that political life that I had was founded upon another generation of leadership in my grandparents' generation when they basically broke the back of a white supremacist oligarchy in Hawaii that was modeled after Jim Crow and was super exploiting immigrant laborers. So, they figured out during World War II they couldn't import replacement laborers, and so they went on strike. And sugar workers did, and they ended up winning a union. And that victory then ended up bringing that oligarchy to its knees and forced Hawaii to become, in some ways, sadly for Native Hawaiians, but a more democratic state. And so, those stories that I was told when I was little were just part of how I, came to understand who I was in the world.
Yeah, that sounds like knowing those stories fueled imagination that anything you might encounter may not be something stuck and that couldn't be changed. And there's your work. Zev, how about you? What's an origin story around your compassionate worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I think a very, very important feature of who I am and the reason why I think engaging in tough conversations and reading difficult thinkers who I really disagree with is so important to me is because I was raised on the political center right. I was not raised in an activist family. It was a family that was engaged politically, but we attended an Orthodox synagogue, but we're sort of on the more liberal end of the community there, which meant that we were in a community of folks who were traditionally observant around Shabbat practice and prayer, and we were a little bit more liberal on those ritual elements. But I think the things that sort of activated me were an amazing high school education and an amazing education writ large that sort of opened me out to thinking more critically about other people and really acting on this commitment to seeing all human life as inherently valuable. And I think just when I think about like my own family story, on my dad's side, both of his parents were Holocaust survivors. And the lesson that one can take from that is often sort of positioned as this is why we need to act politically. This is why we show up, why we need to sort of use our identities and use one's privilege to sort of make sure that these types of incidents don't happen in the future. And I'll say that in many parts of my culture and my community, the lesson was sort of about being safe and that the stakes had been made so clear of what can be put on the line when one becomes an activist or one speaks out. And I try to be really sensitive to that. And I've heard Scott share a story once on a podcast that activists should try to be conscious of the fact that when a building's on fire, most people's inclination is not to fill up a cup of water and to toss it into the fire. And to sort of hold that impulse with this desire to show up and to do more. And so I think the thing that really activated me was to see the relationship between my family story and the struggles that other people were experiencing and deciding that I wanted to be one of those people as best as I could and contribute my little cup of water to sort of this wider effort of folks who are doing their best to try to make the world better.
Thank you so much for that. I'd love you each to get kind of like let's do like a 3-part. Let's see if we can kind of wrap up piece each of you. I'd love to know what's making you hopeful. I'd love to know what you're doing for fun, and then a call to action for the audience. All right, let's go hopeful first. Scott.
Okay, well, I'll give it a stab. I am really made hopeful by Trump's incredibly low approval ratings. This is something that we should all be paying very close attention to because, of course, when authoritarians take over by elections, as Trump did in the most recent general election, they typically have really, really high approval ratings, like often like 80% and more. So the fact of his low approval rating is point of danger as well, because we don't know how he'll react to it, especially if a popular majority tries to push his party out of power in the next election. But it also is a really hopeful sign for us that people are not just buying all of this stuff that they're throwing at us, and that they're not overwhelmed, that we actually are far more resilient than we imagined ourselves to be, and it gives us a lot more room to fight. So that gives me a lot of hope to know that that's happening. Let's see, what was the other part of this?
Okay, I'll come back to you. You can think about it. It's like, okay. What are you doing for fun? Right. Zev, what's making you hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I'm feeling and seeing is just within my own faith community, the progressive Jewish community is maybe at the strongest it's ever been in decades. And the numbers of folks who are looking for alternative religious spaces, who are looking to engage ritually for the first time outside of the political orientation, who want to study Torah and want to find that personal meaning, like the numbers are growing exponentially. And it's an extraordinary moment of opportunity where this new network and this new ecosystem of folks doing special work and building communities is emerging slowly, not quickly enough, but very seriously in a very real way. And that's giving me hope. And then it's giving me hope that that emerging network is happening in relationship to other faith communities, which maybe have already oriented themselves that way, or are holding different sets of conversations in different contexts. Yeah, that's certainly giving me hope. And I think something is slowing. Like the pace of the horrible things happening isn't stopping, but it felt like for the first 3 months of the administration, there was another cataclysmic event that happened, which was shaping national politics in very, very serious ways, which would have repercussions down the line. And whether it's because they've already done the things that they set out to do, some of which they did, some of which they didn't, I think we're in a moment where we've seen parts of the resistance haven't folded. Lots of universities have, lots of universities haven't. Most of civil society hasn't. And I think given those structural forces, we just need to make it till November. And God willing, there will be a free and fair election. And God willing, it will deliver on the results that would allow for a more equal and representative sharing of power on the national stage.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Scott, what are you doing for fun?
For fun, let's see. Well, I'll tell you what I do leading into holidays, which is I watch lots of movies and I make cookies.
Oh, nice. What's your
Yeah.
specialty, or do you have one?
Well, this year it's fruited shortbread. So like, short dried fruits and nuts in it. But
Yum.
I make all kinds of cookies. I like buttery cookies.
And are like your delivery of ice cream pints to dog walking friends? Are you out there delivering, or are you trying to figure out how many to freeze and eat and store?
I make them to give them away. Yeah.
Nice.
I eat very little of it myself. I'm not really a big sweets eater, so
Yeah, I remember. I think we talked about that before. You're a runner, right?
no, I'm not a runner. I'm obsessed with exercising, but
Okay, other
running is
forms.
one of the things. Yeah.
Okay. I think I remember there was some conversation we had about working out and things like that. And I think my
Uh-huh.
ice cream, sending you 12 pints of ice cream is possibly disruptive.
Yes.
Sorry, not sorry, as they say.
I do 300 crunches a day, just as an example. It's because I'm bored, and so I'm doing it.
Oh my God, I love it. All right, Zev, what are you doing for fun?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to the point that I was speaking about earlier on exhaustion, like I
Yeah.
need to be honest about the fact that some of the things that have been giving me joy, like reading and like distance running, haven't been as much lately.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to just sort of see that and face that and yeah, accept it a little bit. And I just bought a guitar, which has been very, very fun, but very much looking to like rediscover my joy in running. The thing that sort of did it was I did my first marathon in October.
Congrats.
And it was so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had really trained for it, but I had hurt myself about 2 weeks before. And I was like, you just start and then you stop. And it just really kicked my butt.
Yeah.
And so I think the memory I have from running right now is of that experience of physical pain. And I'm looking to sort of reclaim the joy. But it's hard, it takes time.
Yeah. Are you teaching yourself how to play the guitar?
I learned a few summers ago, I was living and working for an organization called the International Network of Engaged Buddhists. I want to give INEB a plug.
Yeah.
They do a really amazing work in Southeast Asia. And so I was on an internship in Thailand, living completely alone. And I bought a guitar and like learned on YouTube. And so I haven't had a guitar for a long time. I played throughout college, but I'm just looking to get back into it as an outlet.
That's awesome. Glenn Galich, who's been on the podcast a few times from the Stupsky Foundation, a really big voice in our sector, especially challenging philanthropy to do more, give more, plays the guitar and starts his, instead of starting his morning online, he starts his morning with his guitar now. That's a new practice that he started. Okay, and then now let's do our call to action. Scott, what would you like the audience to do and do next?
Oh my. Well, I think What I would like the audience to do next is to think about adopting a symbol. That would be a good one. I always say that a symbol makes for a better demonstration and that symbols are the lowest bar to participation. Like you can be part of a movement by just wearing a symbol. A lot of people will be able to plug in that way. And so I would say that we should just get our heads together and come up with something, one. And then the second is that the next time there's a big demonstration, I think there's one coming up this spring, that we should wear those symbols and also think about something that we can ask people to do in mass together.
Yeah.
Immediately after or the day after the demonstration. So I would call on all the wise brains who are figuring this stuff out to think about that. What's one thing you can ask people to do that almost anyone could do, that they can take home with them and do that night or the day after the demonstration?
Okay, love it. And regarding the symbols, on your, and we should mention your Substack, the Anti-Authoritarian Playbook, is there like a mechanism to like upload an idea? Or are you taking nominees? I know you're not putting yourself in charge of this, but
I'd have to think about that some.
Okay.
But, yeah, maybe.
Okay, maybe we create some virtual place for people to do that. All right, Zev, what's a call to action that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to second everything that was just shared in terms of all those political actions. I think find a political community that you feel at home with. And I think something that I've been looking for is just I'm looking to join a political community with folks who I might disagree with on all kinds of different issues, particularly an intergenerational community or a community that's bringing together different folks who are organizing around a certain goal, to get that perspective, because I think it's very easy to just overlook from wherever one's vantage point is, particularly when you're working on the national level, you overlook the diversity and just how heterogeneous the country really is. And so I think I've been looking for that for myself. I think that's a great call to action. But I think the biggest thing for me is just I have been feeling completely devoured by my screens, just my phone and my computer and like everything they're doing to keep and hold my attention. And I've kept a diary writing practice for most of my adult life. And I think creating spaces of reflection and refuge that no algorithm or surveillance system can sort of oversee. It's just you and the pen and the paper, and that's it. And it sits in a box wherever you want to put it, I think is really critical for preserving whatever part of ourself can't be bought and sold and just can't be commodified within these systems, which are just so powerful. And I'm finding myself wrestling with that every day of just where do I find those moments of reflection? Often I don't feel like I find them. And I think a call to action would be if we're able to resist this sort of suction force, I think we all would be a lot stronger.
I'll give a shout out for the daily haiku practice. I started it during COVID. I mean, 5-7-5, right? 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5. And yeah, I mean, I'm talking about it here, but like, I'm not sharing I'm not doing it to publish. I'm not doing it I'm just doing it for myself. And the traditional Japanese practice requests or requires that there be some nature component to it. So it's also causing me each day to make sure I have one nature experience so that tomorrow when I get to write my haiku, I've got something to conjure from the natural world, even if it's just noticing the way the wind is blowing the tree branch out my window. I can use that tomorrow. So I'm kind of keeping me also connected to nature. Well, you guys, I think we're going to need to do this again. This was fantastic. I feel, and I hope the audience is feeling the spirit and energy of this, the camaraderie, the collegiality. And Zev, I love what you said. If I'm only hanging out with people that think what I think, by definition, I'm thinking too small and I'm keeping my group too narrow. So I love that idea of, I think there's a pretty big through line that we can start with, and then there's a lot of variety. And I think that's exciting to think about. Blessings to you both. Thanks for being on the podcast and helping us bring fun to the serious work of changing the world.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to the PlayFull Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know of a leader or organization that's doing good in the world and you'd love to help us help them amplify their message, I would love to have them on the show. Go to the show notes and click there, or go to impactfulinc.com/contact. And that's impactful with 2 L's, inc.com/contact. and let us know who you're thinking about. Can't wait to see you next time.